It is very nearly upon us, the release of the brand new Death Guard Codex, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Lord of the Legion himself, the Primarch Mortarion, who has had an absolutely monumental glow up in this new book, and honestly, I do think he could well be the best Primarch out of all of them in 40k at the moment. So up on the screen in front of you right now, you can see Mortarion's rules, and I have updated the datasheet slightly to show the adjustments that are in the new codex. At present, he does cost you 300 points in terms of the old index, but in the new codex, from what we have seen, he is getting a bump up to 400 points, so it is a fairly hefty 100 point increase. The caveat to that, of course, is that we don't know what his actual value will end up being, because codex points are always incorrect by the second they're printed, so that is very much subject to change. So I imagine in the next couple of weeks we will probably see where his actual points value is going to lie, but it is almost certainly, in my opinion, going to be significantly higher than his current 300 point cost. It is probably going to be nearer to 400 points if it isn't actually around that 400 point mark than it is to 300 points. However, for that increased price, he is absolutely one of the tankiest characters in the entire game. He doesn't have lone operative like the loyalist Primarchs, but when you are a 10-inch move monster with fly that has got 16 wounds at toughness 12, a 2-up save, a 4-up invulnerable, and 5-up feel no pain to protect you, it's really not a bad trade. In terms of things like las cannon shots, I think you would need about 35 las cannon shots from a marine to reliably take Mortarion out in one shooting phase, which is of course very unlikely to happen. And even something like a shadow sword with its volcano cannon would need around 2 whole shooting phases to actually get rid of him. So he is really exceptionally durable. But that isn't really a big change from his current datasheet. He is toughness 12 with the same amount of wounds, the same save and feel no pain as he has in the new book. So that isn't a big new difference. Where he has changed quite a lot is in his actual weapons and his datasheet rules. And first up, he still has his pistol, which is called the Lantern, and then his psychic ranged attack, which is called Rotwind. Silence is still a one-shot pistol with sustained hits D3, but it has changed. It's now strength 10, minus 3 AP and 3 damage, rather than strength 9. So it's just a little bit better into those light and medium toughness 9 vehicles that you may be shooting into. Rotwind, conversely, it keeps the same blast, dev wounds and lethal hits that it has before, but it goes up 6 inches of range to 24 inches, and actually I forgot to mention, so does the Lantern. That goes from 18 inches to 24 as well, which is really good, just in terms of getting you some shooting into the enemy from as early on in the game as you can. But yes, Rotwind also goes up to 24 inches, and it gains minus 2 AP instead of just minus 1. So now it is a 24 inch range, D6 plus 3 blast shot at strength 7, minus 2 AP and 1 damage. So it's actually fairly reliable for killing off things like chaff units or big infantry blobs or light infantry units that may be trying to tie up your small elite army, and just getting rid of them really quickly and really easily. When you get to his melee profiles though, this is where we see a few more significant changes. His scythe Silence still has a strike and a sweep profile, but now the strike profile, it loses that flat 4 damage and instead it goes to D6 plus 1 damage. So it is still 5 attacks that hit on 2s at strength 14 and minus 3 AP, but it is in some cases slightly worse because you aren't getting that guaranteed minimum of 4, but the maximum damage you can put out is higher, and also the average is a tiny bit better too. The average goes to technically 4.5, although realistically it's still going to be around 4, but the average that you will be rolling with this is probably going to be fairly similar, but of course the maximum output goes up quite a lot. So I would say, yes, there will be times when you roll a 1 for the damage and only end up doing 2, and that will be annoying, but most of the time you will be doing a comparable amount of damage, and some of the time you will be doing a lot more. If nothing else, just the fact that your maximum damage goes from 20 damage total to 35 is incredibly good, and it makes him much, much scarier into things like vehicles, or I would say even the new Custodes jet bikes. Now that they're 5 wounds instead of 4, this new profile is actually a little bit better because you can now kill them in one swing rather than being forced to use 2 swings to actually get rid of one of them thanks to that flat 4 damage. So it hasn't changed a huge amount, still has a lethal hit, but it is just, I would say, overall a bit better than it was before. The sweep profile, however, actually got quite a lot better, I think. It's still 15 attacks that hit on 2s and have lethal hits, but now instead of strength 7 minus 1 AP 1 damage, it's strength 8 minus 2 AP and 2 damage. So this thing is now brutal into things like Marines, but even some tougher things like toughness 9 vehicles, you can now be wounding them on 4s rather than 5s, because yes, you're only strength 8, but thanks to your army rule of Nurgle's Gift, you will be dropping those toughness 9 vehicles down to toughness 8 when you are in melee with them, so you can now wound them on 4s rather than 5s, so it does make him much better even into vehicles if you wanted to use the sweep profile for whatever reason. Against his preferred target now though, which is of course Marines, that is incredibly strong though. It averages out to about 7 dead Marines with this now, maybe even 8 or 9 if you use the plague that drops enemy armor saves by 1, whereas the previous version, the version with strength 7 and only 1 AP and 1 damage, that only killed about 2. So he is scarier into tanks and vehicles and big scary things with both the strike and the sweep profile, but this new sweep profile especially is much, much better into 2 wound elite infantry now, which is a lot of what you will see in the game. And I mean, even if you do get charged by a big blob of 20 guardsmen, yes, you aren't as efficient now because you're wasting that 2 damage, but still getting minus 2 AP does drop 5-up save units to no save, you are still wounding them on 2s, and you still have 15 attacks, so you are still going to get through a good lot of them. I would say actually in terms of pure melee output, there are some situations where he is as good if not better than the Lion, who is meant to be one of the premier melee combat characters in the entire game, so to be even considered in that kind of category and that kind of benchmark is a very good place to be for someone like Mortarion. But of course that isn't all, because on top of the actual output side from his melee and his shooting attacks, he does have the usual Primarch style rule where he can choose one of 3 abilities to give some buffs or benefits to his unit. These are slightly different from how we've seen them before. Normally you choose one at the start of your command phase and it lasts until your next command phase, or in the case of Angron, he was in the charge phase I think, or the combat phase he could choose his. But Mortarions are now very much more reactive, and you don't choose one at a certain point in the game, you just get to use one of these 3 abilities once per turn. So you get to use them twice a battle round, and they are all, as I said, quite reactive, but really very good for getting the most out of some units near to Mortarion right when you need a specific buff for them. So what he can do is he can, once per turn, as I said, use one of these abilities, and the first one is Diseased Influence. This is used in the enemy movement phase just after an enemy has ended a normal, advance or fallback move within 9 inches of a Death Guard unit that is within 6 inches of Mortarion. And that unit that you pick, your Death Guard unit, can make a normal 5-inch move. So essentially, this is giving you an on-demand reactive move that doesn't even cost a command point. And for a slow-moving, plodding army like the Death Guard typically is, that extra move is just brilliant. As I've said many times before, you can use this to get up nearer to lock down an enemy a bit, or block off a charge and screen a unit, maybe screen Mortarion from an incoming charge, or just to get behind some cover or get onto an objective. A reactive move, even a somewhat slow 5-inch one, can be game changing. So being able to do it for no command points when Mortarion is around or near a unit is so good. One of the other options he has is Boon of Death. This is done in the fight phase. Again, you pick a Death Guard unit that is within 6 inches of Mortarion, and when that unit is targeted by an enemy, whenever a model in that unit is destroyed by a melee attack, you can roll a dice, and on a 2+, that model can fight before you remove the model. So we've got a reactive move for no command points. Now we've got a fight on death mechanic, which is on a 2+, and it's normally on a 3 or a 4+, so it's actually a better fight on death mechanic, again, for no command points. And if nothing else, Mortarion is really now starting to look like this very powerful, very useful utility character just to bring you some essentially free command points and stratagem use over the course of the game. Boon of Death in particular is going to be so strong on things like your Death Shroud, where they do have quite a scary amount of melee, so even if you get charged and you lose a few models by the enemy fighting before you, you can still use this to activate them and fight back and maybe take down a few enemy models with you as your Death Shroud start to die. The final option he can pick from the 3 is Inflamed Reprisal. This is in the enemy shooting phase, and this one lets a Death Guard unit, again within 6 inches of Mortarion, shoot after an enemy unit that has targeted that unit has finished its own shooting attacks. Now, I don't think this one is maybe quite as good as a fight on death mechanic or a reactive move, but some of the shooting in your army isn't actually that bad, and a lot of it does have things like lethal hits, so being able to plink back a few lethal hits back into an enemy unit that shot at you can be, if nothing else, a great way to kill off a few models and maybe soften up an enemy unit that was moving up to shoot and then maybe wanted to make a charge in this turn. You can maybe make it a little bit more uncertain that they want to do that if they've now only got, 7 or 8 models charging in rather than the 10 they had at the start of the shooting phase. Again, though, you do have some units that will really love this. A unit of Blight Haulers with their missile launchers and multi-melters will absolutely love being able to do a reactive shoot. 10 Blight Lord Terminators can be firing up to 40 bolter shots back into an enemy unit with lethal hits. So again, there is a lot of things that could very much make use of this. And if you haven't used any of the other 2 options, maybe it's, the first or second turn in the game and you haven't had a chance to make a reactive move or nothing's in melee, this could be a great way just to get at least one unit, essentially an extra round of shooting into the enemy. The rule essentially is getting you a free stratagem type ability every single turn from Mortarion, which just, as I said, it makes him so flexible as a character and gives you this not only an absurdly durable, hard-hitting unit, but one that does have that level of utility and force multiplying power to just make your army perform even better when it is around Mortarion, even in some cases in the enemy's turn. Overall, I just really like it. I think it is a really good change from the current version of this rule that he has, which is actually called the Host of Plagues. Weirdly, that rule has actually swapped with another rule that he now has in terms of the naming, but the old version of it used to be called Host of Plagues. And yes, he had some fairly good options in that. You could get reroll wound rolls of 1 with Diseased Influence, or get cover on some nearby units with Miasma of Pestilence. But I do think these new ones in the new Codex are just much more useful. They are really nice and reactive, and they just give you a lot more for a unit in your army, I think. And I like the fact that they get to be used every turn, whereas the old one, you picked it in your command phase, and yes, it lasted until your next command phase, but this one allows you to be a bit more specific about what you want and exactly when you want or need it. So you can, in most situations, I think, get a lot more mileage out of these rules and use them in the exact way and at the exact time that you need to. Mortarion's final rule is actually, as I mentioned, the renamed Host of Plagues, but what this does now, this rule Host of Plagues, what it does now is it lets you, at the end of your movement phase, roll a dice for each enemy unit within 6 inches of Mortarion, and you get to add 1 to the roll if the enemy unit is afflicted, which is your Nurgle's Gift army rule if you remember, but then on a 3+, the unit takes D3 mortal wounds. So it's a really reliable way to chuck out a good few mortals into the enemy. With Mortarion's base and that 6-inch aura, you should be fairly easily able to get at least a couple of units in this range, at least from turn 2 onwards. So it's definitely going to help you kill off an extra marine here or there, or chip down some wounds on a vehicle or monster, or even sneakily catch out some lone operative style characters who may be hiding nearby, because with this rule you don't actually have to target a unit, you just hit anything that's within 6 inches. So unless I'm wrong, someone correct me if I'm wrong in that, but as far as I'm aware, that should still capture lone operative characters with this if they are in that aura. So it's a great way to get some extra chip damage onto a variety of enemy units, and it can actually lead to quite a scary sort of mortal wound bomb if you get Mortarion charged into a big blob of enemy and catch, maybe 3 or 4, maybe even 5 separate units in this 6-inch bubble. And then potentially when Mortarion does die, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe there is a detachment where you can auto explode with your Deadly Demise, and he's got Deadly Demise D6, so he can potentially do a huge mortal wound bomb as he dies into the enemy. And if there is a big castled up enemy, Death Star or unit, you can be chucking out a load of mortal damage into them. I think in general, Mortarion is looking a lot better than he was before. On top of the improved army rule you get, the great new detachment options, which we will of course cover in full when I do the full Codex review, and just the overall improvement army-wide for the Death Guard as a whole, he is going to be a very, very strong pick in a lot of lists, I think. And even if he is a lot pricier than he is now, even if he is nearer 400 points than 300, he is just fast, he's mobile, he's tanky, of course, he's very, very killy in melee, he's deceptively good at range, and he brings some absolutely blisteringly good utility buffs, as well as some chip damage from his Lord of the Death Guard rule and the Host of Plagues, so he can just do a little bit of everything, and I just think he is well worth the cost, because he is almost certainly going to survive to get a good bit of use out of him. But as always, I'd really love to know what you think of the new and improved Mortarion, and also how you think he is going to end up falling points-wise. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me, but until next time, I'll catch you later, guys.